Hi, I'm Noam Ital, and welcome to the GovAI podcast. AI is the most powerful technology of our time, and government is still figuring out how to navigate this new frontier. Join me as we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming public service, unlocking potential efficiencies, the risks that no one's talking about, and what happens when innovation moves faster than regulation. Today, I'm joined by Jiri Rutner and Anthony Fisher, two leaders driving AI adoption, governance, and cybersecurity in the public sector. Jiri serves as the assistant to the city manager of Homelessness Solutions, where he focuses on integrating technology, data, and AI to improve government operations in the city of San Jose. Anthony is the data governance manager at the Colorado Department of Revenue, overseeing data governance and AI policy, ensuring responsible, effective adoption of emerging technologies. They also happen to be among the founding members of the GovAI Coalition. Anyone that's working in the state and local space thinking about AI is familiar with them. A group that is dedicated to helping public agencies develop and implement AI policies that are practical, secure, aligned with government realities, and really building a community that's thinking about successful adoption within government agencies. We have the two experts on this and some of the people that at the core of what's happening today. So, Jiri, Anthony, I'm thrilled to have you with me today, and welcome to the podcast. Let's get into it.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having us.
I want to start, I guess, from the beginning on focusing a bit on the GovAI Coalition. So, GovAI Coalition is fairly new. I think a year and a half, 2 years old, something like that. How did this come about? I mean, when I first started hearing about it, I think we heard of a few cities that were engaged. Started, of course, from San Jose, but then really quickly it grew into the hundreds. And so I'm curious, what was the impetus both for the coalition, but then also for you guys personally, each from their own angle? We'll start with you, Jiri, and then maybe Anthony, in engaging into the coalition, and what brought you from, quote unquote, your day job, right, to have this kind of second hat within the GovAI Coalition?
No, absolutely. So in terms of when it got started, I entered in after the city of San Jose had already started setting up the GovAI Coalition and just needed thought leadership to help better understand how to progress the mission of the GovAI Coalition in an effort to support our sort of governmental practitioners nationwide. And so Anthony might be able to shed a little more insight in terms of sort of the origin story of the GovAI Coalition. But in terms of our interest in participating, I can tell you sort of from a personal standpoint, when one of the things that is really something I have worked really hard to build expertise around is how do we get government moving faster? And when I say local government, I'm speaking local government. And how do we equip folks that work within the bureaucracy of local government with the tools they need to be able to drive work forward? And when I say in innovative ways, I feel like that word may be overused, but how do we leverage AI to help do a lot of the grunt work and to help give space to our governmental workers to be able to do the things that they really need to be able to focus energy on? And so that's a very complex answer to that question in terms of how do you do that? And so when I heard folks were getting together to talk about how to harness AI for public good, immediately resonated to my core. I was like, yep, got to be in that space, right? So I got to say, I do feel like governmental agencies are very generally under-resourced, have a ton of administrative legwork that they need to be able to do. And so I feel like the missing ingredient to helping give local governmental agencies a tool really laid within the power of AI and or the use of large language models. So I knew it needed to be in that space to help sort of shape what it could be, what it could look like. I'm very much a person who worked his way through ranks, and so understand at a tactical ground level, the type of work that folks on a ground level have to do. And so this seemed like it would be a massive missed opportunity to not be part of shaping what that conversation could look like. And again, my career has been largely focused on operations, implementation, strategy activation. So it's, again, how do we build the tools in a way that support local governmental agencies? So I would say that's probably one of the biggest things that attracted me to the coalition and to be able to support that work and to be able to grow our membership.
So Anthony, sounds like you're from the early days. So give us even more of the background story on the beginning.
Sure. So it's not like this super sexy Marvel origin story. It's really just a problem that a lot of folks in government face is working with private sector. And so I wasn't there on the ground floor when it all happened, but Albert Kahami, Leila Dodi, Khaled Tawfiq, those are the three that were really facing the issue of transparency for vendors. Much like myself and everybody else who's decision maker in government, you get hundreds of emails a day from different sales folks trying to give you a demo of their product, of their tool, and how great it is, and it's going to save you money and save you time. But the problem was with the AI tools, early on, there was just this, hey, it's AI, come use it. And there wasn't a whole lot of transparency into the models, the algorithms, anything behind governance. Like that was just kind of all thrown out. It just wasn't really considered at that point in time because there were no regulations around it. And so Albert, Layla, and Khaled all tried to get a couple of those vendors that were reaching out to them to be transparent and just tell them about the LLMs, tell them about the algorithms, the technology powering their AI tools. And they, for whatever reason, were just like, nope, we're not going to tell you our secret sauce. So what had happened was Albert, Layla, and Khaled started reaching out to other folks in California, and it slowly started to grow by way of peer to peer. Hey, have you heard about this? Hey, have you heard about that? When I heard about it, I want to say it was September, maybe October of 2023, and I was over at Google. I was at the Boulder office of Google for like a public sector event. One of my colleagues told me about it and was like, yeah, if you guys are developing an AI policy at DOR, which at that point in time, we had just started our first draft of it. So it's not like we were already like leaps and bounds ahead. We had just done a first draft. So we created that, we created our manual, and I sent that over to Albert and the team in San Jose and said, hey, if this is helpful, if this is something that would be beneficial to you all, by all means, take it. Feel free to use it. I then got an invite to the first meeting, which was like 50 people, and we were all kind of trying to solve the same problem of vendor transparency. How do we implement AI? What's a good way of creating a policy? And what's a good way of actually telling folks, not just, from a policy standpoint, because policy only goes as much as you're able to explain it. It's not always the most operational way of getting things done. Some sort of guidance or some sort of an implementation schedule or a timeline. We were trying to figure out like what makes the most sense to get this problem of AI completed and done in a responsible fashion. And that's ultimately where we started from, was just trying to solve this problem.
Interesting. I wasn't planning to jump into the policy right off the bat, but I feel like we have to after kind of some of those comments. Is one of the things, if I was a listener in the private sector and haven't worked with government, I would say, why are they focusing on policy first? I mean, new technology. I had an interesting conversation with the VC a few weeks ago, and his question is, well, AI is a new thing. We're in the trial and error period. There's just going to be experimentation, free market in the private sector. It's going to be the same in government. And what I was kind of trying to explain to him is a completely different model. And I think what you guys are touching on relates to that, but maybe explain to the listeners why is the starting point when you're thinking about AI adoption actually policy?
So the analogy I like using is with policy, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a sandbox for your constituents or for whoever you serve to be able to play in that sandbox safely. Now you're going to tell them what type of wood the sandbox is made out of. You're going to tell them how big the sandbox is. You're going to tell them probably a little bit about what is going on in the backyard of the sandbox that you have, placed this sandbox in. So that's really what you want to try to create, and then giving them the autonomy to choose the sand, whatever grain, whatever color, whatever kind of toys and other things that you want to put in the sandbox is great. Because if you start going a little bit too in depth into policy, it can become, less about the impact that you want and the influence that you want, and more about the terrible phrasing of government oversight and, oh no, like, government's here to run your party. So you want to be as thoughtful and ethical as possible about how you create that sandbox and how you create the rules that govern your policy while keeping people safe. Not to say that
Yeah.
private sector doesn't have to do that. However, with public sector, you don't really get a second chance. If you mess up and you somehow breach a bunch of people's data, or unfortunately, there's things that happen where like people try to go ahead and enter in information, or they're trying to get a service and it doesn't work out well, they're not going to use your service or your program anymore. So now your government intervention or your policy no longer has the usefulness, no longer has the utility to the public. In private sector, you can just kind of like scrap that idea and move on. But with public sector, it's a lot more strenuous to go through all that, to go ahead, recreate something, retool it, build the plane as you fly it, so to speak. So with
Yeah.
government, we always try to focus on policy as a way to create the framework, create that sandbox to allow our constituents and the public to be able to play in there safely, respectfully, and responsibly.
So, Jiri, some of these frameworks are new around kind of AI policy, and you're an operations guy. So, give us a pulse, a true pulse today. If you're looking at both your own city, but even what you're seeing across different coalition members as well, where are you seeing successful implementations of various AI tools internally, and what are some of the gains you're seeing? But then give me also the kind of opposite side of that, where you're seeing the biggest challenges, where we won't call it failing. We're just going to call it where there's a lot of challenges that some agencies are facing in successful implementation.
No, absolutely. I've got that's a very interesting observation, Noam, you made of the sort of difference in approach between private and public sector. And to answer your question, I feel like just laying the groundwork for sort of what is the landscape of local government, I think would be really helpful. So my perspective and what I've observed, and I'm speaking very generally of larger governmental agencies, when we're speaking 5,000, 7,000, 20,000 employees within a local governmental agency, you'll often find several layers of management or leadership between on the ground tactical folks and what I would say the operations, the getting the stuff done on a ground level, and the folks that are often tasked with making the decisions or representing the organization as a whole or the department as a whole. And so I've often observed, I think it's good to acknowledge that those layers exist, and that there's different cultures within all those layers that shape whether an organization is primed to adopt AI or needs to go through a rather clunky process. First, identifying a need. We need a policy. All right, let's put together the policy. Is it shaped and informed by the folks on the ground? Is it broad? Is it focused? Is it within a specific service sector of transportation, of public works, of law enforcement, which is an entirely different area, health and human services agencies? And so I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of I think the answer to your question will be, it depends on who you're speaking to within the organization, what service sector, and it depends on what level of person you're speaking to within the organization, because you'll find very interesting and unique perspectives from those levels, from depending on who you're talking to. So since your question is more focused on from an operational standpoint, where are you seeing successes, where are you seeing challenges? I would say that a lot of the successes we've observed, and when I say success, I want to be very clear. I think having the ability to try to implement, we're considering success for now. Those folks who have less barriers to implementation. And
Yeah.
no, this is just one perspective. I think generally departments that have really robust data capabilities and have the funding are often those that are able to execute quicker. I also think it helps to have a bit of a different hierarchy and structure in terms of whatever comes down from chain of command will happen. I think you'll see those organizations or those service sectors moving quickly. So you're talking fire department, law enforcement, reporting, cultures that are used to reports and have really robust data capabilities in place, have teams with people that can actually sift through and collect the data. I would say it seems like folks in those spaces, even if it's sensitive, have more support to be able to use tools to make their job a little easier, as opposed to service sectors that don't have the technical capability embedded within their departments. So I'm talking like health and human services generally. That was my world. for about 10 plus years within the county of San Diego, where you have the people who have the knowledge in SME in external departments like IT.
Mhm.
Like the knowledge doesn't generally live or not a ton of resourcing focused on being able to do that work at a local governmental agency level. So I would say some of the struggles that we've observed really depend on the size of the organization, depends on the resourcing. How slim are they? Are they at a budget deficit? Do they have really low staff and not the ability to actually execute or have somebody to be like, let's think about implementation. Let's put forth a plan that makes sense, that makes people at the top feel comfortable that what we're developing at a bottom level is in alignment with policy, if such a policy exists, and that doesn't get us in trouble, right? Because again, this is more where we're speaking of very risk-averse governmental agencies who,
Yep.
driven by risk, sometimes it's safer to not act as opposed to act. And so that's also a thing that makes it really challenging is folks may not be acting on things if they don't feel like the risks have been mitigated adequately.
So speaking on the risk, Anthony, this one's for you. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning that these policies were kind of a framework. The impetus was a lot of vendors coming in that were not transparent, and that's a big issue. But there's a topic that, as you know, is close to heart to me, which is once you think about the policy, if that's central about de-risking, there's another element aside from the third party, which is the vendor coming in with the solution. There's also the what I'd call the gray area of AI, which is the user behavior with the tools themselves. So you could have a tool that's transparent, that has all the safety measures in there, but the users themselves can misuse it. We're seeing a lot of examples of that. I mean, we can give the classic example of a police officer that is taking a ticket, coming back to the office, needs to kind of generate a report. Will take a picture of it, upload to ChatGPT, streamline a report there that's really quick. In that process, he just violated PII, right, and uploaded private information. So how do you think about reconciling between the challenge of, okay, we have a policy in place, we know what the rules we want, to managing that across a city of 1,000 or an organization of thousands of people?
So kind of touching a little bit from what Jiri was saying, like the reason why we've seen successes in certain organizations over others is, the proactive versus reactive conversation. Trying to sit down and thoughtfully think through where are the risks. And I always make this joke of like, it's not if something will happen, it's when. So you need to be proactive and you need to really sit down and think through where are your potential risks. Like the example you gave, Noam, is like somebody who doesn't really have the training or knowledge behind whatever that information was on that ticket that you're putting into ChatGPT. That's all PII, name, phone address, email address, like all that kind of stuff. When combined, that's PII. You've now given up somebody's identity essentially. And
Mm-hmm.
so to be proactive, what we've done at DOR and what we've kind of started to advocate through GovAI is an educational track. So we actually have a committee through adoption, our adoption committee, that is the education work group that is working through various use cases to help educate various folks across our GovAI Coalition membership in a variety of different use case settings and different agencies to show them, hey, this is one way you can use AI, and this is how you do it in a safe manner. One of the ones that we started doing kind of to go back to Jiri talking a little bit about first responders was actually made for first responders. And what we're hoping is that if folks are well educated and know from the get-go, maybe even before they get their hands on a tool, what's the safe use, what are the risks, what are the other considerations you should have before using AI, it's going to set us up much, much better. I mean, the thing I think about is like, you're going to have folks who are going to mess up. You are going to have people who are going to accidentally put something in that shouldn't be. So there needs to be some safeguarding. There needs to be some governance around that in some of these AI tools. Like you can find a way to flag that something is, say, financial taxation information or criminal justice information. That'd be phenomenal. But sometimes that doesn't exist or the technology may not be embedded within that AI tool. So you have to make sure that you're educating your staff, you're educating those users more than enough to be able to identify that information from the get-go. Because the thing I think about a lot, and at DOR we're actually starting to implement Google Gemini for Workspace, is people using it to read emails or people using it to respond to emails, and they're not, reviewing that email before it gets sent off, or they're not reviewing what the output was for validity. So we've really stressed that human in the loop of making sure you're double checking every output, making sure you're validating that the information you're searching for, like if it's a big cluster search of research that you just want to go ahead and, compound or distill down a bit, making sure that they're actually validating that it's accurate. Because otherwise, we're going to end up with some really wonky answers and some really weird decisions. And as I mentioned with public sector, we don't really get a second chance. We have to make sure that as we serve the public, we're doing it the best way we can from the get go.
So I'm going to take a wild guess that both of you are on the younger side in your organizations. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. So I think part of what we're talking about here is intuitive to us, right? I mean, even for me, right? I'm on the late end of technology when I could think of my kids that my 2-year-old's already, knowing what a tablet is, how it scrolls. They're born with technology. But I'm still, I guess, young enough to be able to embrace some of these changes. One of the big challenges I want to talk about beyond just policy and enforcement, guardrails, is the adoption side, which gets to education around the actual use of this technology. And so, how do you think about this challenge, which not only is it a question of educating the workforce, but it also gets into a whole different method of working, right? For example, prompt engineering. The way you ask a question of ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever the foundational model may be, an LLM, is very different than way I would ask you a question in terms of getting the best results. So how do we change or educate people that may already be fixed in a career that's 20 years going, have a certain way of doing things work the way they are, and now you're coming and saying, well, I can do 80% of your work in a few minutes and free up your time to put your expertise in what your really is and over the years. So give me some of those thoughts, Jiri. We'll start with you.
Yeah, no, that's a great topic, and one that I don't really have an answer to, but I appreciate you sort of sharing, wanting to understand sort of what the approach would be to try to help the folks we work with. And let me just explain, with the city manager's office in the work of homelessness, we're uniquely positioned to work with decision makers. So the folks that may not necessarily or aren't the ones doing necessarily on the ground work, but really shaping a lot of how it is that we do the work within a city in terms of services. And then we work again with a lot of the tactical folks. And one of the things I realized is I can talk all day long about AI and how cool it is and all the things it can do. And often I see, like, a little bit of glazed eyes, like, okay, I've heard this before. So that's one approach. The other approach is just showing them how a tool works in real time, right? And providing complex prompts so they understand that it's not just about asking the GPT to make a cool song that rhymes with ex-employee's name for their for their retirement party, but you can actually layer complex sort of prompts, and as long as you layer it in a specific way, it can produce an output that's pretty darn close to the level of or degree of quality that is required to do a lot of the work. And so that has been done by on screen sharing, like, hey, check this out. Let me show you a prompt. Let me show you how this cranks out a memo as an example, or how it can lay out a white paper or summary document, or at least help brainstorm ideas in terms of how to approach. Just that framing and then them seeing how it works, huge difference. Because it's, again, one thing to have somebody, and I honestly think it's really challenging for private sector, because I think they want to understand the inner workings of government, how they can develop tools that really support local governmental agencies. But without having visibility to the sausage factory, what's under the hood, it's very difficult. And so I think the other meaningful thing that resonates with folks that didn't have access to this technology, or it's relatively new, or are still using other social media platforms that are like TikTok or Instagram as an example, it really helps to show them how it serves them in their sector, right? So not just some generic output, but like for public work, specific to construction, specific to how to lay out again in a timeline and in a way that resonates with them, I've noticed makes the most impact. So it's been a journey of showing them uh, giving examples of hard, tangible work that have produced using GPTs, and just kind of bringing them along for the journey of education.
I agree with that completely. I'll add a couple other pieces to it, but the showing and having them actually play with the tool as much as prior I said, sometimes we want to put policy in place before we get people having hands on tools. But if the policy's in there, the guidance is there, and now we're working through our implementation schedule and we're in the education phase, getting ahead of it ahead of time and trying to give people as much context as possible. Because, like you were saying, all three of us, we grew up with, you know, the start of the internet in varying degrees. Some of us, I didn't have Wi Fi until like probably my freshman year in high school. So I was very underprivileged. But we all grew up in an
I,
era where we had to go and look for things in an encyclopedia, or we had to go to a dictionary and read through things, read through a whole book just to do a report. Now you can just seamlessly write that report in 2.5 seconds. So if you give people all the context of like, here's what this technology is, here's what it can do, then you start kind of training them into that funnel of like, here's how you should use it. And here are some very specific use cases, and here are some specific prompts and things that you can test out. I think that builds the best practice you could possibly ask for. That not to say that you're not going to have somebody who does something a little weird or wonky, but as Jiri laid out, being able to kind of funnel that knowledge of like, here's the high level, here's that mid range, and now here's the very narrow focused. Now go play with it. I think that really sets us up for success.
Speaking of success within the state and local and government space, I've asked this before in my previous podcast, but I'm curious also, given your unique position in the GovAI Coalition, if you're put the hat on of a private sector, you're a startup building in the AI space, and you're interested to sell to government, what is your recommendation? What's advice you would give sitting on the other side, and what maybe some of these companies where they miss the mark, and what would be your strategy and successful approach?
I would say, just a little background. We had a project management office in the county of San Diego that we built up, and we were transforming the continuum of care, meaning how we provide emergency services for folks that have drug and alcohol addiction and mental health challenges. And one of the things that our consultants that we would bring in to help support this complex multi-year work, it would be several hours of onboarding orientation. So I made a point of bringing them on and telling a story. So I feel like in order to help private sector, there needs to be a commitment from local government to be able to share and give insight to folks coming into the fold. Here is how we're structured organizationally. This is how decisions are made. These are the folks that you want to bring to the table to help shape the tools from a very tactical perspective of like, this widget needs to look like this, or we need to pull from that data point, that data source, and then make sure they're also bringing along the executive leadership within that sort of chain of hierarchy as part of that. And that is very unique across the board in different cities, just depending on who you're working with, county, who you're working with. And so I would almost recommend, I know you asked the question from the private sector lens, but from the governmental agency lens, taking the time to educate our private sector partners on the structure of the organization, right? To help them help us help with some of the solutioning, right? So I feel like, how do you get knowledge from government to private sector as quickly as possible? And how do you help private sector understand the sausage factory and the sort of inner workings of local government so that they're not hitting their heads against the wall when they're trying to solution, or when they're trying to come up with ideas in terms of, here are some tools that we know can support you. We just don't really know your inner workings, so we can't provide recommendations that resonate to you if you don't show us a little bit what's under the hood. So
Yeah.
very long explanation, but I think orientations, onboarding, education around the inner workings are a good start when bringing in private sector partners to help with solutioning.
Anthony, on that, I mean, you probably get dozens of emails coming in from vendors sending you. If you were on their side, right? What would be the right approach to get the attention and kind of make an impact or be successful?
To me, and this is something like from investment banking, I don't know why this is a part of my vocabulary or like a catchphrase of mine, But I'm always like, send me something, send me documentation. Because, to Jerry's point, doing the organizational map and making contacts and learning about, what the mission is and all the various aspects, that's helpful for implementation once a sale's been made or once there's, somebody's trying to map out the organization to understand where to sell. That's great. But the thing that I always think about, and this is something top of mind for me, is the documentation aspect. Because whether it's city council, some local smaller group of folks that are a committee that are like basically giving you your budget, or for us, the state, it's a House or Senate committee, we need to make sure that we provide them answers to their questions. And the only way we get that is documentation from the vendor. So we need as much documentation that you are willing and able to provide, whether that be like, a little plug for the GovAI fact sheet. The GovAI fact sheet is a great first start because that tells us your nutritional facts of what is being caked into your tool. But even something like a white paper or a use case so that we can kind of visualize how this might actually fit in. Because I think a lot of folks are starting to see that there are a lot of AI tools out there, some homogenous, some are very, very niche. And just getting an email that's like, hey, my name is so and so from such and such company, and I have an AI tool that's going to blow your hair back. Like, that's great. But okay, where's the documentation to support blowing my hair back? Because first and foremost, I have no hair. But secondly, it's like, I need to see that documentation because the second I get a question from my leadership about where is my budget going, I'm going to hand them that documentation. Then, even after the sale's made, once we start talking about, the use of AI, we're going to get a question from a House or Senate committee, or at a city local level, it's going to be some sort of city council or a local authority that's going to ask these questions. You have all of that right there. And then the government professional who is now in charge of managing this program, managing this tool, can take that documentation and springboard it into a use case or into further SOPs and other documentation of how this is being used. Because otherwise, like, you're going to be sitting there as the decision maker 6 months, 8 months, a year down the road going, well, I don't know why I bought this thing. I just bought it because it sounded cool. Like, that's not a good answer. So
It had an AI in the title. That's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, if you all, as, private sector folks, if that's who I'm speaking to, private sector folks who are trying to sell AI to public sector, if you can give us a lot of documentation, a lot of information to help us visualize and understand the use of the tool and how we can respond and answer those questions to our higher leadership and authority, that makes our job so much easier in saying, cool, let me call my procurement person. Let's drop a contract and let's get this thing started.
We're going to come back maybe in like a month and see if your inbox has changed now to vendors that have listened to the podcast and now sending you documentation rather than a kind of cold pitch email with how great their AI is. I want to shift gears, kind of final question, if you will. We talked a lot about the present, and I want to look a bit forward. You guys are both at the forefront within your organizations and also within the GovAI Coalition around AI adoption at the state and local level. Let's look 10 years into the future now. I want just to get into your kind of head, your thinking around if AI adoption is successful in the government 10 years from now, what does that look like in your mind? And likewise, what does it look like if it's not successful?
Well, if it doesn't go well, we're building a variation of the Death Star. That's a more morbid viewpoint. But all sort of all
AGI will be here.
right. But all jokes aside, that's I find it. I forgot where I heard this, but when being asked a very specific type of question like this, I think the person who was describing it said that we're going to have a landscape of mini bureaucracies that are managed by AI across the nation at a local governmental agency. And so, kind of building on that idea, if every city, for sake of the conversation and for just having fun with it, were to build our own sort of mini super intelligence or LLM that pooled all the data from the city or the local governmental agency and had connections to other bureaucracies across the nation. And there's different levels of bureaucracy. So local government's sort of web of AI connected to one another, connecting to the state, connecting to the federal. I can imagine a world in which information is being exchanged across all the various levels of governmental agencies vertically. So I call it the vertical sort of integration of data. And then you have your system set up so you're also doing a horizontal integration of data. So that, as an example, if you have all the departments of transportation across the nation trying to solve a similar problem, there will be probably opportunity to share certain bits of data, not share other bits of data, in an effort to have a more holistic view of what's going on the ground, which can then help share data sort of at a state level, which can then be shared at a federal level, depending on what this sort of web of bureaucracies is trying to accomplish. And I think there is potential opportunity for very, very strong data and communication sharing vertically and horizontally on a national scale. So that's kind of how I would see it in the 10, 15 years, probably sooner.
Anthony, for you, what aside from the Death Star on the kind of challenging scenario, what other big kind of looming potential challenges, failures could you see if it went wrong? And then for you, what does that utopian scenario look like where AI is adopted successfully 10 years from now?
So I hate to sound like maybe a potential cliche, but they're one and the same. We get the golden record. We know exactly who Noam is. We know exactly who Jiri is. We know exactly who Anthony is. And it is the same on both ends, but slightly different outcomes, slightly different impact. On the bad side, the Death Star side, if you will. We have the government knows everything that you have ever searched for. We know everything that you've ever purchased. We know every service, you've ever done through the DMV to Fish and Wildlife. Like, we've got every license you've ever had. They know everything. And for some people, I think that's really scary, that your government knows everything about you. I mean, outside of the fact that most of us have a rectangle or square or whatever, some shaped iPhone or Android in their pocket that's listening to them 24/7, that's already given some concern. Now the government knows everything about you. So that, I think, it's a huge privacy thing. It's a huge invasion of people's individual liberties. Something we need to really make sure that we've gotten the policy, we've gotten the operationalization around that. Otherwise, we're at risk to really have a lot of public distrust of government. But on the plus side, like I said, they know everything about you. So as Jiri noted, it creates a lot of operational efficiency from the local level to the state level to the federal level. It also, in theory, I would hope, helps mitigate or limit a lot of fraud or identity fraud issues that we're having. Because, like, for example, in a lot of states with their taxation divisions, they'll get people who are trying to file taxes under fake names or put in phony filings to try to get a rebate from the state. Now, all of a sudden, that is pretty much eliminated. That's almost impossible to do, because if it's an AI that's monitoring each one of these taxation returns, it can see, hey, Anthony Fisher with this social security number at this address and all of this information that it's given us, that this citizen has given us over the last couple of years, doesn't really match and looks a little bit obscure and is an outlier in the data set of what we would expect from Anthony Fisher. So we're going to go ahead and flag that. We're going to have an auditor take a look at that manually and make sure that that's okay. So it kind of gives us some protections. It gives us some really great efficiencies from a government level, like I said, from the bottom all the way to the top to the federal. But my biggest thing is just, we need to make sure, if we're going to do this and we do this well and we create this web and this network of AI and governments all working together, we need to make sure our citizens' privacy and civil liberties are not going to be violated, so that people don't lose trust in government or lose trust in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thought that we kind of can end on, which is, you mentioned the opportunity and the challenge are one and the same, different sides of the coin. And so I think all of this conversation is food for thought and how we start to build that. And you guys have been at the core of that with building the GovAI Coalition. So, Jiri, Anthony, I want to thank you guys. This was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the GovAI podcast today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Noam.
That's it for this episode of the GovAI podcast. AI is reshaping governance in real time. And as we've seen, the path forward is filled with both promise and complexity. But conversations like this, open, challenging, forward-thinking, are how we shape a smarter, more responsible future. The GovAI podcast is produced by Poldu, our editor is Yochai Mital, with production assistance from Shani Roth and Shakel Dror. We'll be back in 2 weeks to tackle more challenges and explore creative solutions at the intersection of AI and the public sector. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and never forget that even the sharpest tools mean nothing without the hand that wields them.